You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Faith in Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. Welcome wherever, whenever, however you are joining us. Here's what we're going to do today. Talk today's sports topics, including our hit or miss with Ed Billick. He's going to join us in just a minute. Our guest today in the second half of the show is Professor Max Engel. He's a teacher of philosophy at Creighton University and author of the book On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. He's been on the show. We're going to do part two of that. He's been on the show before, I should say. He's going to be here for part two. He's a great guest, just a good guy altogether. We'll do our weekend headlines, and then we're going to talk about forgiveness in sport, both in the first half of the show and at the end of the show. If you are listening for the first time, one of the things that you know that we do here is we want to hear from the listeners. We want to hear from you folks. Is if there's a story that you have, like a good news story about a coach or a player or administrator or referee in your county, in your district, we'd love to hear from it. We'd love to hear from you on that, whether it's Pee Wee football or Little League baseball or all the way up to the college ranks. We want to hear good stories in the world of sport because in essence, that's what this show is about. Faith in sport, where we apply our faith to all aspects of sport. So it doesn't matter how you're involved in sport. This is the show for you. Thank you for joining us today. Brother Ed, welcome to the show. Ed Billick, as always, we start with our conversation on a hit and miss, something good or positive, something good or slash positive or negative slash bad in the world of sport. As always, you go first.
Well, first of all, John, always good to be back here on the show and say hello to all of our Radio Maria listeners.
Absolutely.
From all their affiliates, and we're just happy to be part of your faith journey and part of your sports journey. So really cool, and I've been doing this with Dr. Acquaviva over the last so many years. A hit for the weekend, John. I tell you, it's being a big Pittsburgh Steeler fan.
Yep.
And we'll get to them, but being a big Carolina Panther fan, because you and I are, homed here in Charlotte, North Carolina. The Seattle Seahawks fan base were so loud yesterday. They were so into the game, so passionate. There were 8 offsides, 8, false starts, if you will. Numerous penalties. The quarterback could not talk to the guys on the field. It's that loud. And you see these fans in the stands. Yeah, they're painted with their fluorescent green and they're fanatically crazy, yelling their lungs out. I didn't see anyone sitting enjoying an ice cream cone. I didn't see anyone eating a hot dog. They were into the game like I just couldn't believe. So I'm thinking about this hit or miss thing. I'm thinking for sports, this is a hit. When the crowd, when the fan base can determine the game. I think Carolina could have won that game had it not been for that 12th man fandom up there in Seattle. Those fans are crazy. And then I go to the Steeler game last night against the Raiders, and my Steelers were in Las Vegas, and half the fans there were waving terrible towels. we got Steeler fans all over the country. We have Steeler fans all over the world. A couple of my buddies were at the Vatican, and they were waving their terrible towel. I think Pope Francis waved a terrible towel once too.
I think I saw that.
Yeah, I think you did. So some of the bishops as well. Point being is that fandom is all over the world. It's all over the United States. And I love the black and gold. And I think a lot of people do because of the Rooney family. Yeah. They're devout Catholics and they love their faith. And that's the way they treat people. So my hit is clear the fandom, the folks that really get into promoting their team, whether it be Seattle or Pittsburgh or whatever. It would just be nice if us Catholics could be at mass like that. Now, you couldn't hear the priest talk, of course. You couldn't hear the bells ring when they raised the host or the chalice. Right. But it would be, if we could get our faith on fire like these fans get on fire for their professional football teams, I think that would be outstanding.
No, I agree with you, buddy. You took that conversation in a couple directions, but just to jump onto that last point, there since COVID ended, and I think by all intents and purposes it's ended, there's been a noticeable decline in a lot of aspects of our society in participation. And one of them is, and the main one is I think people going to church, right? And people receiving the Eucharist, people receiving the other sacraments. And I agree. I think that's one thing that we want to do from this show is we rarely, if ever, talk just about sport itself. We always talk about how it relates to our faith, the ethics of our life, the character that we want to build in ourselves and the people that we're coaching or being a teammate with, working with in the world of sport. But yeah, you're right. If we could channel this passion that we have for sport into our faith, we're going to catch other people on fire for the faith. And that's going to be one of the things I am both fearful and almost expect our Lord to do on that judgment day is, why weren't you as passionate about the faith and my son Jesus as you were about your home team? And that's the challenge of the day for our listeners. That's a challenge for me. That's probably a challenge for you. We put our time, energy, and money towards some things, and then we kind of just have our faith take a back seat. And I love that last part of your conversation on that.
Well, whether it's Major League Baseball or NFL or whatever sport you want, a PGA golf tournament, that Sunday Mass is your hour. It's too short as well, but that's your hour to celebrate your faith. And yeah, you're not cheering and painting your face and dancing in the pews, but that's where you should be, working that spiritual connection. We should be doing it all the time, but that's that 1 hour a week. And if you haven't been in a while, I would encourage, get over to Mass, get into the sacraments. It'll do wonders for you. And a shout out to Coach Tomlin. Where's that crucifix? I'm not sure exactly, but it sends that message to the Pittsburgh Steelers fans that he's a devout Catholic. And we were talking also about the head coach of Notre Dame, where they lost to Ohio State. Yep. Who now John reinstituted Mass before the game, right?
That's right. Yeah, he was recruited years ago. Marcus Freeman's his name. He ended up going to Ohio State, and ironically, that was the game this past weekend. Ohio State and Notre Dame, the two highest ranked teams that played. So it was the biggest game, not just of the weekend, but of the fall so far. And it went down to the wire. Marcus Freeman now is the head coach at Notre Dame. And even though he is the head coach at Notre Dame, he went to Ohio State. But when he was being recruited by Notre Dame, he said the most memorable and moving part of that recruitment day was when the whole team, Catholic or not, went to Holy Mass sometime in that morning or afternoon, depending on when that game was. And he reinstituted that policy, basically. We're all going to go to Mass as a team. He's a convert to the faith, and he saw how important that was. And boy, did God speak to his heart that day. And my guess is he would probably never regret the fact that he went to Ohio State. He was probably an All-American. I think he played a couple years in the pros and so forth. But he might very well say, I would have liked to, or I certainly would not have made a mistake if I would have chose Notre Dame. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
And College Game Day on Saturday was at South Bend there, and in front of Touchdown Jesus, and the fans were all dressed, and a lot of Jesus kind of Christ will save you banners. That was aired on ABC or ESPN, one of those two affiliates, and no, it was good to see. But we got to keep our faith in front of us, just like we keep our sports teams.
Absolutely.
What about you?
Well, just a little radio break here. Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. The other voice here is Ed Billick, our regular guest on this show. You're listening to Radio Maria, and this is Faith in Sport, where we look at sport in particular through a Catholic lens. If you have a question for us, if you have, going back to that, what I said in the beginning of the show, if there's somebody you'd like to see as a guest on our show, or there's a story you want to tell, like a good, positive, faith-related story in the world of sport, regardless of the level, you can tweet me at j.aquaviva1, that's the number 1, or you can email me at faithandsport@wingate.edu. Faith and Sport, that's A-N-D, faithandsport@wingate.edu. All right, folks, you're in the middle of a conversation Ed and I are having about our hit and miss of the week. And we often just go with what happened over the weekend, or at least the last few days. Ed, my daughter, Claire, she's 13. She's in 8th grade. She's the oldest of our 5 little monkeys. And she is a cross-country runner. And she actually happens to be pretty good at it. But that aside, the other day they had this race, and there was probably 60 runners from about 5 or 6 different schools. There might have been 7 schools represented. And what they do is the girls take off and they run 2 laps around this cross country, through the woods and over the hills and so forth. And about 5 or 6 minutes after the girls take off, the boys of the same age, in this case, middle school, they take off just so the finishes are staggered a little bit. And we noticed that well after the boys ran their first lap, this guy comes around, this student comes around, this middle schooler, and he is severely handicapped. Ed, he has one of the tank tops on of one of the other teams that's competing. Uh, he is pretty obviously at a shortcoming, probably intellectually as well. He's severely handicapped, though. His one arm is almost straight in the air to the side, and his legs are disfigured, so he has a really strange and bad gait, right? So he's really laboring in this 2-mile run, right? Everybody finishes for the girls. Everybody finishes for the boys a few minutes later, but their teams are all sitting around not too far from the finish. And the team that is represented, that he represents, this one Christian school not too far from where this is all taking place, not the school of my daughter, they all run down to the woods where it opens up into this field, and then there's about a 50-yard sprint to the finish, right? And the whole team goes down to the wooded area, and they start clapping, and they're in about 50 or 60 people. And I grabbed Claire and I said, Claire, come on, I know what they're doing. They're going to root this kid in. You should have heard the ovation. They would have contended with the noise that the Seattle Seahawks fans were making, Ed. It was outstanding. This kid starts smiling. He almost goes into a laugh cry, but he's in so much pain, you can see. And it's partly because he's so tired, but I've been feeling that he's got some bodily pains there. And the way all of us cheered him in, it was inspiring, it was motivating, and it was a wonderful moment, brother. And that is not only the hit of the week, that easily could be the hit of the year. It was just an outstanding scene, and I love it. Your commentary.
That is tremendous, and I always love to see when others support those that aren't as fortunate. But also, what it does is it leaves an impression. You'll remember this for years. The team will
absolutely
remember this the rest of their life.
Absolutely,
they will tell this story to others.
And the courage it took, Ed, for him to be a member of that team, knowing he's going to fall way behind. He's never going to be in contention for a medal or even in the top 50 kids. He was going to finish last every time. But I want to end this conversation with this, and this is something that all of our listeners can ingest and think about and pray on. But, you know, it's a known stat that 99% of all Down syndrome and related babies are aborted. 99%. But yet, Ed, in those moments, who's the most celebrated person in that competition? What does that say? It's the strangest dichotomous thing in our culture. We abort almost every single one of those babies, but yet when they're in our culture, we celebrate them to no end. They're on news programs, they're on these national news programs, they do specials on ESPN about these kids and men and women, but yet look at the stats when it comes to abortion. Just something to think about, but I thought I'd throw that out there because I think it's worth pointing out one of the things in our culture that is really sad, actually. But still, that was a hit, and I thought that was tremendous. And she has another meet, I think, tomorrow, and I have a feeling that same team's going to be there, and we're going to get to do the same thing with that kid, is just cheer him across the finish
shout
line.
out to him, and shout out to all those that are less fortunate but still have the heart and will to compete.
Absolutely. Folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport here on Radio Maria. I am Dr. John Acquaviva. I teach exercise science here at Wingate University. Ed and I do this show from the Charlotte area. Ed Billick is the other voice you hear. We're in the middle of this conversation about our hit and miss of the week and just general sports topics. Now, speaking of something, Ed, that has to do directly with our faith is the act of confession, act of contrition. It's one of our sacraments, of course. It's dear to virtually everybody that's practicing. But I love this clip. It's an outstanding clip where somebody puts things into perspective. I'm going to play this clip from Coach Deion Sanders. That name should sound familiar if you don't follow the world of sport. He played for several teams in the 90s and beyond. He's a Hall of Famer in the NFL Hall of Fame. He was an outstanding defensive back and punt returner. but now he's the coach of the Colorado, Buffaloes. Yes, of course. And they were 1-11 last year, and they started the season off 3-0, but that's a side point. When they went 3-0, the game in which they won their third game in a row last week, they played against Colorado State. And during the game, there was not only this big hit on a Colorado player, one of Deion Sanders' players, but it was a vicious hit. And it was flagged, but I didn't think it was egregious where the kid should be kicked out of the game, but I think he was. But it was a hit, but it was right after the ball goes by the receiver, and boom, the defensive back, Henry Blackburn, really clocks this player. But it was not just any player. It was their highest rated player, kid named Travis Hunter, highly recruited athlete in the world of football before he signed with Colorado. And Deion Sanders, after the game, was asked, what are your thoughts? And I think everybody wanted him to lay into this player from Colorado State. Instead, Ed, this is what he said. This is Deion Sanders in the interview after the game when asked about this hit.
Henry
Coach Prime
is a good player who played a phenomenal game. He made a tremendous hit on Travis on the sideline. You could call it dirty. You could call it he was just playing the game of football. But whatever it was, it does not constitute that he should be receiving death threats. This is still a young man trying to make it in life, a guy that's trying to live his dream and hopefully graduate with honors or degree, committed to excellence and go to the NFL. He does not deserve a death threat over a game. At the end of the day, this is a game. Someone must win, someone must lose. Everybody continues their life the next day. Very unfortunate. I'm saddened if there's any of our fans that's on the other side of those threats. I would hope and pray not, but that kid was just playing the best of his ability, and he made a mistake. So I forgive him. CU, our team forgive him. Travis he's forgiven him. Let's move on. But that kid does not deserve that.
How about that, Ed? That is to the point. It is right. It is the correct thing to do. And so many times I think coaches and players, they cannot muster up the character, the ethics, or the understanding what is the right thing to do, because winning and losing there's such a pressure to do that. And despite the fact that they won the game, he lost that kid for several weeks. I don't know if you heard, but this Travis Hunter on that hit had a lacerated liver. He's out for close to a month because of this. Thankfully, he's not out for very much longer after that. But I thought that was the best clip as you're going to see from any coach or anybody involved in sport surrounding the violent game of football. Your thoughts?
Deion Sanders has always been one of those Showtime. Well, that's what they call him, Showtime, Coach Prime.
Prime time, yeah.
Yeah, for him to come out with that is just like, wow. And he is the story of the college football season so far. Yeah. So where can someone go watch that again if they missed it?
Yeah, just if you just Google it and put in Deion Sanders and forgiveness. Deion Sanders and forgiveness. And I'll mention this because I think that it is worth saying further to his credit. I was never a fan of Deion Sanders until he became a coach. When he was a player, boy, he was a hot dog. And he loved the camera and he liked the microphones in front of him, and he wanted a piece of whatever was going on, right? He wanted to be asked his opinion on a lot of stuff. And then he became a commentator for the NFL Network. I didn't really care for the manner in which he did that. But boy, as he matured into this position of college football coach, Ed, he seems to fully get it. Like he got hammered this past weekend by a better ranked team, Oregon. They lost by 36 points. And I purposely this morning went to that post-game press conference in which he addressed his team against the better Oregon team. And he was classy. He was just straightforward. He made no excuses. He just said what a good coach should say. And just a couple years ago, I would have thought he wouldn't have made a good coach. And not only has he made a good coach, yeah, he's going to make mistakes. He's probably going to need forgiveness himself because he's probably going to say something or do something. But so far, he's done so many things right. And of all the things that he could have chose to done right was this hit on his player in which he asked not only to tell them to stop, please do not pose any death threats to this kid. It was just a football hit, but please find it in your heart to forgive him.
Yeah, it's only a game.
It's only a game. Brother, one more thing before we go. I'm wondering, I sent you this link and it's almost comical, right? Like going, the couple of things we've talked about were kind of light in nature, right? We both had hits, and this is certainly kind of more of a somber thing about forgiveness and this kid being hurt in the Colorado game. But this other story it's just downright outrageous. And let me set it up, folks. Is most people know, I shouldn't say most, many people know that if you're a major city, and I mean this throughout the world, you probably host a marathon or a half marathon, 13.1 miles or full marathon, which is 26.2. Every major city, the Pittsburgh Marathon, Ed's showing me, sure, we do this via Zoom so we can see each other as we chat. But of course, folks, you just hear the audio. And Ed has Ed, did you put that shirt on? It says the Pittsburgh Marathon. Did you put that on because of what we're going to talk about? No, honestly. All right. So did you read this article or
the good Lord had me put it on, and I didn't know why.
So here it is, bro. It's the Mexico City Marathon, and folks, because this show is about character, ethics, and morality, right? We always talk about things where people cheat or where they do something particularly high character, whatever the case is. But there have been people in the history of marathons that have cheated, right? They've literally got on the subway, or they will cut blocks out, right? Because they'll have it so nobody sees them or watches them, and then they'll rejoin the race and they'll cut a couple minutes off their time and sometimes several minutes off their time. Last month, Ed, reading from the website that reported this, approximately 11,000 runners were disqualified because of the following. They had used cars, public transportation, or bikes to skip sections of the 26.2 mile course. Ed, who does this? I mean this literally. Can you come up with an answer? Who says, I'm going to run a marathon, and then they cheat the distance, the 26.2. And it wasn't just a couple people, 11,000 people. Holy smokes. Brother, your commentary on this, and then we'll say goodbye.
It's hard to believe. The people I know that run marathons or half marathons, they do it for an accomplishment. They do it because I've done it. I was able to do it. I wasn't able to ride a bus or take a car and just come across the line and get a medal. I mean, how do you live with yourself?
Like literally, I'd be reporting this if it was 11. I really would. If it was 11, if it was 1,100, that'd be kind of shocking. 11th. I mean, is this a thing? This is obviously a thing, right? Like this is what people do. And Ed, you're right. It's all for what? You get a certificate, or you get like a little, I don't know, a hamburger?
I ran the marathon. I completed in X amount of time. And so then around the table, they go, yeah, but you cheated. I mean, what do you want to be? You want to be known as a cheater? I don't know. It flies in the face of the whole thing. I don't know. I don't. Maybe some of our listeners can help us understand it, but I can't.
Maybe so. In fact, that'd be a great thing. I'll bet $100 there's a marathoner or long distance runner or competitor, swimmer or cyclist. If you could, would you have done that? And do you know people? And give me some reasoning. And of course, I know the answer, right? We just want to win. It's our ego. It's our pride. It's just unbelievable. It wouldn't even occur to me to do something like that. It's I don't know.
I'll tell you this. This is funny. I think it is. My wife and I were watching our daughter run a half marathon, and there was runners coming around the corner. So I just jumped out into the flow of runners, and I ran so my wife could take a picture like I'm running the marathon, which I'm not a half marathon. And then I was exhausted after about 20 steps. I had to get out of the race.
I love that for the picture. What a great picture.
But we all know that I did not run it. I mean, of course. That story, that is crazy stuff there, John.
Yeah, 11,000. Wow.
It is crazy. It is broken. Come on.
We talk about a broken people, right? That so many people are going to do it just to win a medal or something. All right, Ed, brother, you are great for appearing on the show. It's always a great conversation. Always gives me energy. Brother, you have a good rest of the week, and we'll talk soon.
You too, John, and all of you listeners. God bless and stay safe.
All right, folks, that was Ed Billick. You're listening to Radio Maria. The show is Faith in Sport. This is where we merge sport and virtue. So if you are an athlete, you are a coach, administrator, referee, you're involved in sport in any way, this is the show for you. We have more coming up. We have Max Engel. He's a professor of theology at Creighton University and also the author of the book On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. So a little catchy title there. Be sure to stay with us. We're going to take a break for a couple minutes. We'll come back with Max, do weekend headlines and a couple other things before we land the plane here on Faith in Sport today. Keep with us here on Radio Maria, folks. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Faith in Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva, Faith in Sport, where we look at sport through a Catholic lens. You're listening to Radio Maria. We are so thankful whenever, wherever, and however you are joining us on today's show. Either way, it's much appreciated. Here's what we're going to do the second half of our show. We're going to have author and professor of theology at Creighton University on. He's Max Engel. And the book that he has authored with two other fellas is called On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. We're going to do, after Max gets off, we're just going to spend a couple minutes recapping some of the headlines in the world of sport. And if we have time, we're going to talk about forgiveness in sport and kind of a follow-up to that conversation we had in the first half about forgiveness, in particular, coming from Colorado's coach, Deion Sanders. Let's bring on our guest right now. Again, he is Max Engel, professor of theology at Creighton U. Max, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be here, John. I'm well.
This is fantastic. Now, off air, you and I were talking, and I even asked you, is this a fair question to ask? Now, you've graduated, right? You've literally and figuratively graduated. You have your undergrad. You did your master's. Now you have your PhD in theology. And as you go along in life, just like anybody who ages and thinks and so forth, which virtually everybody does, right? You start to have different perspective on certain things in life. You and I have several things in common. First and foremost, we're both saps for being Detroit Lions fans. But that aside, that doesn't make us bad people, as you know. But the thing I want to ask you, though, is I have, in part due to the show, just because it creates conversation, has your view of sport changed as a result of you writing this book about theology and sport? Has it changed as a result of you thinking more about sport? Like, is sport worse for you, better for you, or is it's the same but just different? You take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, John. It brings a lens, right? And I think I always had that intuition looking at sports that something more is there. But now professionally, I teach this, I write about it, I present, I speak on it.
Yep.
It really amplifies, or maybe magnifies would be a better word, sort of magnifies my focus on what I see in sports. Whether I'm going to a high school game, I'm teaching my own youth sport teams, or I'm watching my kids whom I'm not coaching. So I watch a little more critically, I watch a little more closely. And so I feel attuned to the good stuff. I see the good stuff. I recognize. I'm like, oh, that's neat. We need to applaud that. Let's. Oh, that's a grace moment there. This is cool. And my elbow. Like my buddies really hate watching games with me a little bit because I'll speak to my, hey, that's. Did you guys see that? And sometimes they're like, cool, and sometimes they're like, dude, we just want to watch the game.
Yeah.
That's why I watch with my kids and not my buddies as much. But I also see the negative. Like when I see some behaviors that I see the larger scale. It's not just an individual being a jerk. I see that as a larger product, or I connect that to larger things in our society that, man, we don't need that sort of self-aggrandizement, or we don't need that focus on the self, or that lashing out in anger, or, putting something on social media that, oh man, that really diminishes, I think, what I just saw last night in the game. And then you're writing about this in a way that it can be really unfortunate. So that's how I look at sports differently. It looks more closely. I see the good, I see the bad, and I do pray, John, to keep the cynicism at bay, or that skepticism.
Very good.
It's kind of like training my heart to see. Like I can't go back to where I was and sort of that naivete.
Right.
But I can go forward, and I can see the world as as fallen, and we can move on. So that's a little bit kind of how I look at how I've come to see sports a little bit differently.
Very good.
As I've gotten older.
Very good. Folks, you're listening to Radio Maria. The show is Faith and Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. We're talking with Dr. Max Engel. He's the author of the book, On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. So what was you got together with these two other gents, Matt Hoven and JJ Carney. What was the main, was it your idea? Did they bring you aboard? And remember, they're not even going to hear this, so you can just, brag and go, John, I had to drag them in. It was purely my idea. But regardless, what was your motivation to write this book? Like, what was it? Because, like, boy, the world needs to insert faith into the world of sport, or was it just more of like a reflection of what's gone on in the past? How can we draw people into this book for you?
Yeah, I think, thanks for asking. The book comes out of a course that we recognized, I think, 5, 6, 7 years ago, that students really wanted to at Creighton University, and then Dr. Hoven's up at St. Joe's College in Alberta. There's a hunger and sort of a seeking for faith, and they love sports, but they didn't see how they were connected. So Dr. Hoven developed a course, and Carney and I, we're here at Creighton. We're like, oh, that's a cool idea. We're buddies back in PhD work in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
So then Dr. Carney and I taught a course for a couple semesters together. It was a great blessing. But we didn't have a text that could, we're kind of patching together text, this chapter, this article, this little section, and we're like writing our own stuff. And we realized we have to write this that we can use, that's accessible to, they're not, the undergrads that we teach are primarily freshmen. They're
Sure.
not theology majors.
Sure.
They're students that like athletics. They like sports. They're at a
Right.
Jesuit Catholic university.
Yeah.
They're willing to, they don't have to take this course, so they opt into it. So they're willing
Sure.
to be challenged. What does my baptism have to do with my love for football, or my experience as a runner or as a tennis player?
Sure.
And that question is one that we start off with, like, what does your baptism have to do with your love for sports? And
Awesome.
when you start with a blank look, we see that as, okay, this is where we start at the
That's
beginning
right.
of the semester.
That's
We
right.
want to see where we get to the end of the semester. So we wrote the book to access sort of that lay reader that doesn't have a sophisticated theological background, but cares enough, whether they're Christian or Catholic or not, interested or wherever, and they have an interest in awareness of sports. And we've been pretty successful. The book has gotten pretty good traction.
Awesome.
People have read it that aren't in our class. We've presented on it. It's been reviewed a couple times in some different journals, which is really good to see.
Sure.
Getting that affirmation from others who are like, hey, this is really worthwhile. Like,
Sure.
I didn't have to read it. I read it. It was helpful for me. And they did a review on it. So that's a bit of the history on that book there.
Awesome. How many people, what percentage of the students, because I thought, like, when you make this connection between their baptism and sport, what is the percentage? And this is one of the 120 plus Catholic universities or colleges out there. You probably see regular stats on this. Who proclaims to be a Catholic? What percentage of the students that come through the doors at Creighton?
At the university writ large,
Yeah.
between 70 and 80% of the student body, I think,
Got
most
it.
recent.
And what type of comments do you hear? Like, what do you think? You're like any professor like me. There's evals that you get at the end of the semester. What are the main positive comments that come about it? Like, Dr. Engel, you helped me in the world of sport see something through a lens that I never thought of. But what in particular? Like, is it something like that? Like how the sacraments relate to the world of sport? Something like that?
I think you nailed the first one. The first one is students come in. I think it's natural for you, John, and for me to see a connection between our faith and every aspect of our lives. That's not sort of normal or natural for so many of our young men and women. So
Right.
The first thing is you nailed it. Like, they see that connection. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't understand. But I think the second thing that is I have noticed in the past couple of years, certainly since the book came out, is the role of suffering in sport and the significance of loss. And it usually takes, we're past the midway point of the semester before the stories of, the hurt, the getting cut, the injuries, the dreams. I get a lot of students at Creighton. They we're anticipating maybe going D1 or playing
Right.
on a major college team. And, this past spring, I had a Creighton women's goaltender who had a season ending knee injury and potentially a career ending injury. And luckily, I don't think that's the case on the career. But inviting them to see that hurt and to see that in a different lens, because we don't talk about suffering in our culture much at all. And when we do, unfortunately, I don't think we talk about it well. So I think that's one thing that's like put a fine point on. This is something that students see differently, beyond just, I'm seeing connections that I wouldn't have realized.
Folks, we're talking with Dr. Max Engel, professor of theology at Creighton University and author of the book On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. You're listening to Faith in Sport here on Radio Maria. Thank you for joining us today. Max, when you talk about suffering, do you also comb over the suffering of the fan and the people who are, because when you first said suffering, it's true. Like, we suffer a lot as athletes, but did you watch or see the highlights and know how Notre Dame lost on Saturday to Ohio State? Right?
Oh, I had I was in my living room watching it live.
Yes.
My wife did her undergrad at Notre Dame.
Oh, she did.
Notre Dame degree. I mean, our family bleeds,
yes,
Notre Dame blue and gold. So that was, yes. And
so
in
wait a minute. Are you a bigger Detroit Lions fan or University of Notre Dame fan? And I know it's maybe unfair to say, but is it equal? Your passion.
On Saturdays, it's all go Irish. On Sundays, it's go Lions.
So this is brutal for you. So I'm surprised. In fact, my apologies, because I'm bringing this up, and you're like, John, sure. I was hoping to forget about it, but you must, right, talk about also the true anguish and putting it in perspective that our Lord wants us to do, right? Like, sport is a great gift from God, as JP2 said, right? But yet we desperately need to keep it in perspective. But do you address in this book about the suffering of the fan? Because that's what most people, right? This goaltender, only a handful of people get hurt, but there are millions of people in this country that suffer, and that suffered on Saturday alone because of that Notre Dame loss. Yeah,
the role of fans, we didn't cover it in the book as much as I think we would have liked to. We have a long list of things of like, our next book.
Sure.
But it is that sense of, we care and we buy in. And I think that there's a communal dimension there. And in our classes, when we talk about this, we get into the significance of community and, what's authentic community and how do we build that? Yeah. And that's why we ache. And then we get into like care, like, why do I care?
That's right.
And then it gets into questions of identity and, what is it that I'm taking my identity from? Like, I feel pretty well grounded that I love it when the Lions win and the Tigers. But, I'm bummed or whatever when they lose, but my core being isn't rocked. I set my heart on other things. The sports, I practice caring and I can see how it impacts, but I don't let it sort of spiral out. So I think that that's how we talk about sort of the connection that we have with our sports teams of community and identity, and how we take our identity from the communities that we associate with and that we buy into, and how really important that is for us kind of on a larger scale. Like, if we're taking our identity from things that degrade others or maybe dehumanize others, or we're blind to things, that becomes a problem. And we need to take a real critical lens to that too.
Absolutely. I'm going to steal a question from Chad Carlson. Of course, you know him. Sure. He is he has a radio show as well. He's a PhD in the world of kinesiology.
Yep.
And I was a guest on his show, and he asked me a great question. I didn't expect him to. And he said, what was the most heartbreaking loss as an athlete that you experienced? And so I'm going to ask you, what was, and this is more lighter, right? This is kind of a lighter end of the question, but was Saturday as painful as it's ever gotten in being a fan of any? I mean, there was 1 second left. You are stoic, brother. You are stoic, man. I can't believe you're not, like, tears would be, if Michigan, remember the Michigan State game where they fumbled and Michigan State ran it in
quirky,
2016.
wild ending. Yeah.
If I was a guest on your show and you started, I would say, please hit the pause button. Let me cry here before I answer you. And you're just so stoic. You're just moving on like, John, it's just another game. This silly thing called sport doesn't really bother me.
I worked out my angst on Sunday. I can tell you that.
It's good to have mass, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's one that most recently I can think of that hurts significantly. I'm going to throw in Creighton's Elite Eight loss in the final seconds last spring. That was
in basketball.
In basketball and men's basketball in the NCAA tournament. Being a bucket away from the Final Four.
Yeah.
The first time we'd ever made the Final Eight. I mean, that was a devastating, kind of watching that team intimately.
Yes.
Like it's, I know that when I go to women's games, I'm calling the women by their first name.
Yes.
Men's games, it's a first name basis. Like it's not last name, it's first name, whether I've had them in class or not. And sometimes I have. So that was a real devastating loss. And then with my teaching my sons, because fortunately or unfortunately, my sons weren't sitting on the couch with me during the Notre Dame game.
Yeah.
But for the Creighton game,
they were there.
Like, okay, they were there. Like on the couch. I'm having to rein my emotions in and help them because, it's code red for at the then my fourth grader and seventh grader. One's reacting strong anger and one's reacting strong sadness.
Sure.
Trying to keep this in check and keep some perspective. And it's okay to feel that.
Yeah.
But we don't lose control of our that kind of thing. So those two losses in the past year, prior to that, I'd have to scratch my head a bit for a real gut wrencher, but those were two.
Well, then, brother, you have been gifted with a bad memory because if somebody asks me, I'll go, well, there's 162 games in the normal Tigers season, right? And I would name, and it's so funny, like you could see that, like if you look at the box score and the Tigers lose 6-5, but then if you're watching it, you saw that they lost with 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, a grand slam, and the whole thing changes. You're like, why did God put that in front of me? I did not need that. Your heart just breaks. But of course, it's when you're watching, and I agree, that's one of the gifts and why ultimately I think college sports is better than the pro sport is that the people in the stands know those people on the field. And the only people that know the people on the field are maybe a couple people in the world of pro sports. But in college basketball, college baseball, college football, you know those people. You and I are their professors. Those people in the stands, they take philosophy or exercise physiology class with them, whatever the case is.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Listen, brother, you are a great guest, and one of the reasons I'm not getting to these other questions is because I want to put that carrot out in front. And I want to have you on the show again in a few months so we can just keep having these conversations. But I'm going to leave you with what I heard just recently is a fantastic joke. By the way, it's the first time I've ever told a joke. I've done hundreds of shows on Faith and Sport, but you are going to appreciate. You ready? This guy's walking along the beach, and a genie bottle pops up, and the guy, he goes, maybe it's a genie, pops it open, and the genie hops out and he goes, yeah, you've heard this is true, you get a wish. He goes, but it's got to be something unique. You can't do money or looks or anything like that. And the guy says, I got it. He says, I want to go to Hawaii, but I can't stand flying. You got to build me a bridge from the west coast of the United States all the way over to Hawaii so I can just drive at my leisure, right? And the guy says, what? Or the genie goes, what are you talking about? He goes, do you realize the brick and mortar and the time and effort? He goes, do you got anything else for me? And the guy thinks for a second and then says to the genie, okay, can you get the Detroit Lions to win the Super Bowl? And the genie thinks for a second. And he goes, how many lanes do you want on that bridge? 2 or 4?
Oh, I love it, John.
Isn't that great? Listen, brother,
thank
you for all that you do for our faith. Thank you. And I mean this with all sincerity. Good volunteer coaches are hard to come by, and I bet you're one of the good ones. You're a great guest on the show. Much appreciated that you came on. And please, in a couple months, when we do part 3, please say yes to that, okay?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, John.
Thank you, Max. Folks, that was Max Engel, professor of theology at Creighton U, author of the book On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. And get his book. In fact, the other 2 that you'll see on there are Matt Hoven and J.J. Carney. They're all PhDs. So in other words, they're all well-educated and write really well. This is a good read. and it's great for people who are just simply in two categories. You're faithful Catholic and you love sport. That is the book for you. Folks, listen, we only have a few more minutes left on today's program, but there's two things I want to get to, and one of them is something that I promised just simply on the last show, and that was a little discussion on forgiveness. So it'll be an extension of our conversation that we had in the first half of the show about Deion Sanders, and one that I mentioned with Dr. Engel there. But first, let's do weekend headlines. Just a couple things going on in the world of sport I want to touch on. Major League Baseball, we're in the final week of the season, which means the playoffs are near. The Atlanta Braves are sprinting to the finish line and look great to win the World Series again. Remember, that's my prediction. For the first time in 7 years, the New York Yankees are not in the playoffs. They were eliminated over the weekend. I feel terrible for those Yankee fans. No, not really. They've won more than about a quarter of all World Series championships. But they're still hurting. Just Max and I were talking, they're still hurting. College football, several big games this past Saturday. The biggest one is the one that Max and I were just talking about. So forgive the repeat here, but number 9, Notre Dame hosted number 6, Ohio State. It was a tremendous game to the finish. Ohio State scored with 1 second remaining to win that back and forth game. They're at the 1 yard line with 1 second remaining. I'm not exaggerating. They needed a touchdown to win, and they did it. The current top 5 in college football are now University of Georgia, in this order, University of Michigan, Texas, Ohio State, and then Florida State. So there you have it, sports news that may or may not change your life. Folks, let's go on to something that I promised, and this is one of my favorite topics to discuss in the world of sport. And I mean that literally. In the beginning of this show, in the first couple of minutes, Ed Billick and I, my special guest, just about every time we do this show, I played this clip from Coach Deion Sanders in which he discussed in the post-game conference last week, in which Colorado was playing against Colorado State in this football game. And there was this vicious hit by the defensive player from Colorado State. And it took out the star wide receiver, star player for the Colorado Buffaloes, Travis Hunter. And after the game, there was death threats on this gentleman from Colorado State. And it was all on social media. And Deion Sanders, the coach of Colorado, got wind of this. And then he was asked, what is his thoughts on this? And I have a feeling some of the people in the press, and certainly some of the Colorado Buffalo fans, we're hoping to hear something about, this kid needs to be punished. There needs to be some consequences for this hit and so forth. But he said, let's forgive him. Please do not extend any death threats to him. In fact, the opposite of that. Let's forgive him. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because their forgiveness is the middle name of being a coach, of being an athlete, and being a fan. In other words, when you're a coach, your players are going to make mistakes. And it's easy, especially when this is part of your life, right? This is how you pay for food. You're a coach, you're a professional coach, you're a coach at the college ranks, whatever the case is. Even high school, some of them are paid and paid quite well. And it's important that they win. It's important that they have success on the scoreboard. And they must forgive. Their players are going to make mistakes all the time. The referees, from the coaches and the fans' standpoint and the athlete standpoint, are going to make mistakes. They need to be forgiven. Holy smokes, folks. If you are at a little league game and you're getting mad at that umpire, I want them to take off their masks, because sometimes they're just a little older than the players. They're sometimes as young as 15, 16 years old, calling the game of a 10-year-old game, little league game, and you're getting on them, and you expect that referee or that umpire is going to have some great skill and great insight and all this particular, experience to not make any mistakes or limit the mistakes. But they're at that little league, they're at that high school level for a reason. They're not professionals in that capacity. They're just making a few bucks on the side usually. Please forgive them. Almost no times in all the games that were played this weekend, this year, in any sport, did they have anything involved in the sport. They had no interest in who was going to win. They just called the game as they saw it. And sometimes one team gets slighted more than the other, or seemingly. Please forgive them. And as fans, boy, we have to forgive coaches on who they play and what play they call. Yes, it's good to be passionate, or it's okay to be passionate. Yes, there's a lot of passionate fans. And yes, we want our team to win. Boy, I know that more than anybody. Let's have this team win. Come on, you guys, let's get another win. Whatever the level of sport you're at, whether it's your little kid or it's the professional teams like Ed and Max and I were talking about, whatever it is, please find it in your heart to forgive those people involved in sport. And if it's in your heart, if it's in your mind afterwards, you have to consider whether it's something that you need to bring to the confessional. Folks, that's all we have time for today on Faith in Sport. I am so thankful that you joined us today. I want to end with a quote from St. John Paul II, in which he said, "When sports are played and understood in the right way, they're an extraordinary expression of the person's best inner energies and of his ability to overcome the difficulties of competition." By the way, this is someone who is an athlete himself, John Paul II, who's always appreciated sport and embraced sport and knows that it's an important part of our culture, but yet he asks us to carry our faith onto the field, onto the court, onto the track. Before we go, special thanks to Ed Billick, author Max Engel, for joining me on the show today. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. Please join us next time here on Radio Maria for more Faith in Sport. In St. Sebastian, please pray for us.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.